Hello YouTube. In this video I want to talk about Gettier cases and why I don't think Gettier cases provide a convincing reason to abandon the traditional analysis of knowledge. So a bit of epistemology 101. One of the central questions in epistemology is, what is knowledge? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for a belief to count as knowledge? And the story goes that the traditional answer, the traditional analysis of knowledge, was that knowledge is justified true belief. So S knows that P, if and only if S believes that P is true, and S is justified in believing that P. That supposedly was the view that pretty much all philosophers had up until the mid-20th century, when a guy called Gettier came along and presented some cases where it seems that a person has a justified true belief in a proposition, but they do not know that proposition. And then in response to these cases, modern epistemology set off on this attempt to amend the traditional analysis to find a better definition that avoided these sorts of cases. So Gettier's cases were a bit strange, but there are more intuitive ones. But Gettier has this example, for instance, where somebody is going to a job interview, and they see another person. So Smith, let's say Smith is going to a job interview. Smith sees another person going for the interview, Jones. And Smith sees that Jones is counting coins for some reason, and Jones counts out 10 coins and puts them in his pocket. So Smith knows that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, and then Smith is told by the CEO of the company that Jones is going to get the job. So Smith has good justification for believing that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, and he has good justification for believing that Jones is going to get the job. And from this, Smith infers, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So Smith has a justified belief, it seems, that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But now, suppose that actually the CEO was, I don't know, just lying or something, or maybe something happens to Jones, such that actually it ends up being Smith who gets the job. So Smith is going to get the job. But it also just so happens, just by chance, that Smith has 10 coins in his pocket. So this proposition, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, that's Smith believes it, it's true, he has justification for it, but intuitively, apparently, doesn't count as knowledge. That's a classic sort of Gettier case. Another one is, Smith, let's say that Smith has a friend called Jones, and Jones is constantly driving a Ford around. Maybe Jones offers Smith a ride in his Ford, etc. So Smith comes to believe that Jones owns a Ford, and then on the basis of this belief that Jones owns a Ford, Smith makes the inference: well, either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona, because any proposition of the form P or Q is true just in case either of the disjuncts is true. So okay, either Jones so since it's true that Jones owns a Ford, it's also true that Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. And it so happens that Jones was lying. He doesn't really own a Ford. But it also just so happens that Brown is in Barcelona, just by chance. Smith obviously didn't know anything about Brown's whereabouts, but the proposition Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona, it seems Smith believes it, it's true, and he has justifications. Justified true belief, but it's not knowledge. So on the basis of these sorts of cases, these rather unusual sorts of scenarios, the thought is, well, justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge. And then we have to ask the question, well, what more do we need? What more do we need beyond justified true belief to have knowledge? And a lot of work in epistemology is based on this question. There are actually more intuitive sorts of Gettier cases. So a case which I quite like is the stopped clock case. So let's say I wake up in the morning, I look at the clock, it says 8 o'clock. So the clock reads 8 o'clock. Now, it so happens that it is in fact 8 o'clock, but also uh, the clock had stopped at 8 p.m. last night. I don't realise that the clock had stopped, of course. So, I just look at the clock, it says 8 o'clock, and that provides me a good justification for believing that it's 8 a.m. So my belief, it is 8 a.m., is true, it's justified, it's a justified true belief, but intuitively, it's not knowledge. Okay, so so I think that Gettier cases do not provide any good reason to abandon the justified true belief account of knowledge. I should say that I do not myself endorse the justified true belief account of knowledge. But all I'm saying here is I don't think Gettier cases are a good reason to drop it. And I actually kind of feel like the justified true belief account has got more going for it than most of the accounts of knowledge that have been developed in response to Gettier cases. So I suppose in that respect, I think the Gettier cases have been they've had a negative influence. So the issue, I think, is, I mean, there's kind of like two problems as I see it. I think with a lot of these Gettier cases, it's actually not the case that the people in these scenarios have justified true belief. And actually, the way that epistemologists tend to think about Gettier cases is, I think, sort of symptomatic of a broader problem with philosophy, which is that philosophers will often assume that beliefs have the form of, so they'll assume that our beliefs have the form of propositions that kind of follow logical relations. So let me explain, right? Let's take the case of Smith going for his job interview. So the thought is, okay, Smith sees Jones counting coins, so he believes that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, and then Smith is told that Jones is going to get the job. And so the thought is, well, then Smith can infer from this that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And of course it is true, right? If we have the proposition that, Jones will get the job, and we have the proposition that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, then, yeah, we can logically infer the proposition that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But the issue is that what is it that Smith actually believes here, right? So when Smith holds this belief that the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, I would suggest that the man just refers to Jones, right? So, I mean, of course, I can phrase it as the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But, I can use, like, the man, right, to kind of pick out the abstract man, right? Like, so, for instance, if I see a job advert, right, I might believe that, like, a man is going to get that job, or maybe a person is going to get that job. I suppose if I'm, living in a sort of patriarchal society, maybe I will just believe, oh no, it's going to be a man who gets that job. But of course, I'm not thinking of a specific man. But in this case, in the case of Smith, yeah, I mean, we can express his belief by saying that he has the belief that the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But we have to be careful there, because it seems pretty clear to me that what Smith believes is that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, and Jones is going to get the job. So the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. In that sentence, if Smith has that sentence in mind, the man refers to Jones. Smith does not believe that some abstract, indeterminate man with 10 coins in his pocket is going to get the job, right? Like, clearly not. Now, again, the proposition, the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, of course, does follow from the propositions that Smith believes. But it's not at all clear to me that it's actually possible for us to like, so if I have some belief about a specific person, it's not clear to me that it's then possible for me to hold a belief about, like, some more abstract proposition that logically follows from that. I'm not sure that's how beliefs work. So I'm not really sure I buy that this is a case of justified true belief. Similar point applies to the case of, Jones owning the Ford, and either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. So what Smith believes is that Jones owns a Ford. And of course, if Smith has ever, done a bit of logic, then he's going to know, from the proposition Jones owns a Ford, it follows, given the truth tables for disjunction, of course it logically follows that Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. But I mean, in this case, it just seems like, well, what you actually believe is just that Jones owns a Ford. I mean, think of it like this, right? If I believe a disjunction, if I believe P or Q, then I mean, I'm going to know that if either of those disjuncts is false, the other one must be true. So if I believe something like, let's say, well, either John is at the beach or he's at the cinema. If I then learn that John is not at the beach, then I'm going to think he's at the cinema, and vice versa, right? Now, in the case of Smith's disjunction that he supposedly believes, well, it doesn't work like that. So Smith believes Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. But of course, if Smith were to get the information that Jones is actually lying about owning a Ford, then he'll just stop believing that disjunction. He's not going to infer that Brown is in Barcelona. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some broad sense in which Smith believes this proposition, Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona, but he doesn't seem to be seriously committed to it in any sense, right? Because if Smith learns that first disjunct is false, he's not going to infer that Brown is in Barcelona. He's just going to give up his belief in the disjunction. And obviously that's not how genuine beliefs in disjunctions work. I mean, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say genuine beliefs, but he's not as seriously committed to the disjunction as I would be in the case of, well, either John is at the beach or he's at the cinema. So again, I'm just not convinced that this is really a case of justified true belief. And I think that, when we look through a lot of these sorts of Gettier cases, similar problems arise, right? With many of these Gettier cases, obviously there's tons of Gettier cases that have been proposed. I can't go through all of them, but it really does strike me that we're operating with a very strange notion of how beliefs work, right? Like the assumption is that beliefs are propositions that have these logical relationships, and and essentially like beliefs function, right, in the same way that like formal logic functions. And I just don't see any reason to believe that. I mean, I think formal logic is great. I think formal logic is a very useful idealization. It's very useful for evaluating arguments and so on. But I'm not so sure that it's completely accurate as a representation of how human beliefs work. Now obviously, I mean, look, not all Gettier cases are like this. I gave another case of the stopped clock case. In the case of the stopped clock, it does seem totally plausible to me to say, when I wake up in the morning and I see that the clock reads 8 o'clock, I do just believe that it's 8 a.m., right? So maybe this is a genuine Gettier case. I mean, even in this case, there are things we can say, right? So I would actually wonder, in the case of the stopped clock, well, do we want to say that I actually have justification in that case? I mean, in order for that case to work, it would have to be that I'm just glancing at the clock, right? Because if I look at the clock for 5 seconds or longer, then I'm going to see that it's not working. So I kind of get up, I glance at the clock, and then I assume that it's 8 o'clock. Obviously, I also kind of have background knowledge that clocks do sometimes stop working, right? I mean, certainly I think that if anything important was riding on this, if it was the case that I had some important meeting that I had to get to for 9 o'clock, say, and I know that I need to leave the house at 20 past 8 or something like that, I'm probably not just going to glance once at a clock, right? I'll take a longer look at it, or maybe I'll check another clock, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think even in this stopped clock case, we might wonder whether the person really has justification. But there may well be genuine Gettier cases. So okay, but the first point I want to make is that I think a lot of the supposed Gettier cases actually just aren't cases of justified true belief. That when they're analysed properly, you can well, you can just dismiss them in that way. So one of the reasons why I think the Gettier cases are not a particularly convincing reason to abandon the justified true belief account is just many of these Gettier cases don't work. Now, on the other hand, I'm only saying many of them don't work, right? Maybe there are genuine cases of justified true belief, or at least genuine cases where intuitively a person has justified true belief, but they don't have knowledge. So what I would say about this is that, just sort of broadly speaking here, it seems that pretty much any account is at least going to be potentially threatened by Gettier cases if certain conditions hold. So Linda Zagzebski has this nice article called The Inescapability of Gettier Problems. And she says that any account of knowledge, any analysis of knowledge, is going to face Gettier cases, provided the justification condition and the truth condition come apart. Or maybe you don't even want to say justification, right? Maybe you say knowledge is true belief that meets some other condition X, right? But provided X and truth come apart, you're going to be able to construct Gettier cases. So by come apart, we mean just that X is not, like, X does not guarantee truth. So for the justified true belief account, justification does not guarantee truth, right? Justification is fallible. There can be beliefs that are false but justified. So, maybe we think that scientists in the 1700s were justified in accepting Newtonian mechanics. Of course, it turned out that Newtonian mechanics was false. So, okay, they had a justified false belief. So Zagzebski says, look, on any account of knowledge that allows justification to be fallible, or that allows property X to be fallible, if we say, knowledge is true belief plus X, if we allow that you can have an X false belief, so if we allow that there can be a case where a false belief has X, you're always going to be able to generate Gettier problems. And it's pretty straightforward. So you just start with a random case where you have a false belief plus the property X. So, false belief that's justified, perhaps. And then you make it so that, like this property X is enough, it like meets the bar, whatever the bar may be, for knowledge. And then you just sort of amend the case so that just by chance, just by luck, the belief ends up being true. So, you start out with this is what's happening in the Gettier cases, right? Like, we start out in the Smith case with, when Smith is waiting to get his job, he has this belief that the man who'll get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And initially, when we describe that case, we imagine that this belief is false. Smith has justification for it, but it's false. Because, Jones isn't going to get the job. But then we say, oh, but, just by chance, Smith has 10 coins in his pocket. And so we amend the case so that it's true by luck. And the thought is you're pretty much always going to do this, right? No matter what you add to the analysis of knowledge, as long as you allow that, property X does not guarantee truth, you can always make it so that a belief possesses property X, but is true just by luck. And then that's going to be a kind of Gettier case. So the thought is, well, okay, any analysis of knowledge on which, justification and truth come apart, on which you can have justified false beliefs, well, that's going to be subject to Gettier cases. So, you might think, well, okay, fine, maybe we just go with a sort of infallibilist view then. Maybe we just say that justification does guarantee truth. The problem with this is that this is also going to have a whole load of very counterintuitive consequences. For one thing, it's going to mean that I have pretty much no knowledge of, the empirical world, because I might be mistaken. Anytime I believe anything about what's going on in the world, I might be mistaken. Maybe I'm being deceived by an evil demon. So this is going to raise the standards of knowledge very, very, very high. And I've already mentioned, we might think, looking back in the past, okay, well, scientists in the 1700s, obviously they were wrong, they were incorrect to believe Newtonian mechanics, but maybe they had justification. So we think they had justified false belief. So it doesn't seem as though justification actually is infallible. Or at least if you say that justification guarantees truth, that is going to have a bunch of counterintuitive consequences as well. So now what we're faced with then is, okay, well, you've got two options, right? You can say that justification guarantees truth. That has a bunch of counterintuitive consequences. Or you can deny it, and then you're going to get Gettier cases. But I mean, Gettier cases are supposedly counterintuitive. But now we just have like two options, both of which have counterintuitive consequences. And so I don't think that, so that the sort of, if we kind of step back a bit and, recall the general shape of the debate here, we start out with this very simple, very straightforward analysis of knowledge, where we say, well, knowledge is just justified true belief, okay? But then it turns out that this supposedly faces these Gettier cases where intuitively people have justified true belief, but they don't have knowledge. And that's supposed to motivate abandoning the justified true belief account. But now it turns out that, well, like every option here is going to have some counterintuitive consequences. So if we say that you can have justification without truth, that's, no matter what sort of other features you add to the analysis of knowledge, that's going to open you up to Gettier cases. So you're going to get Gettier cases anyway, unless you say that justification does guarantee truth, but then that also has a bunch of different counterintuitive consequences. So, I mean, it seems like any road we take here is going to open us up to some counterintuitive consequences. But then I think, well, okay, it doesn't seem as though the Gettier cases are really giving me much reason to to worry about knowledge as justified true belief. It doesn't really seem to weigh that heavily against the traditional analysis of knowledge. So I think that, yeah, that's pretty much my case for retaining the justified true belief analysis, or at least for thinking that Gettier cases don't really provide a good reason to reject it. So it's kind of like two prongs, right? Like, first of all, I think that many of these Gettier cases actually just don't work. They're not cases of justified true belief. There may well be genuine Gettier cases, but if there are, then any fallibilist account of knowledge is going to incur them, right? Any fallibilist account is going to face these Gettier cases. And so Gettier cases don't really tell one way or the other against any particular account. So they just don't provide a reason to abandon the justified true belief account. I think, as well, one of the things that I wonder about this, and maybe this is a bit sort of tangential, like looking at the history of epistemology over the last few decades, is I wonder really what it is we're actually trying to do when we seek an analysis of knowledge. So the way that it's framed is, well, we want to figure out what the concept of knowledge is. We want to figure out the necessary and sufficient conditions for something to count as knowledge. Now, of course, first of all, when we ask what is the concept of knowledge, that's us assuming that there is such a concept. I mean, I don't think we can just take it for granted that I wouldn't take it for granted that the way that sort of this works, when people talk and think about knowledge, is that there's just this kind of like one essential concept that they all have in mind somehow, that they may be approximating to a greater or lesser degree, right? Like it may well just be that different people have these sort of subtly different things in mind, and there really isn't just, and like when we talk about like the concept of knowledge, that's just a sort of abstraction or idealization. But even if we assume that there is some fixed concept of knowledge, right? and that this is what is referred to by the word knowledge. I wonder why it would really matter, right? So, like let's suppose for example that we found some watertight analysis of knowledge, and this analysis manages to avoid all Gettier cases. It manages to avoid all counterintuitive consequences. Um, okay, so what? Why why is that interesting? It seems to me that what we would have, if we managed to get that, if we managed to get an analysis of knowledge that avoided all Gettier cases and all other counterintuitive consequences, seems to me that what we would have is a kind of an explanation of how English speakers happen to conceptualize things. Um, but so what? Like why is that interesting? I don't know. Maybe it's well, maybe it is interesting, but it doesn't. I'm not really sure like what the kind of philosophical relevance of it is, right? So because we could easily imagine. Here's the thing, right? Let's say that we come up with this analysis of knowledge, and it really is just watertight. It doesn't face any Gettier cases. That seems to me to tell us something about how English speakers are inclined to use the word knowledge. But we could easily imagine some other society of people who, let's imagine that there's some population of people who also speak like just a slight variant of English, and they just use the word knowledge in a slightly different way. So they have some other like slightly different concept of knowledge. And in fact, it may well be the case that when we look at other languages, there isn't, it may well be the case in other languages that that like the concept knowledge is slightly different. But even if it isn't, we can just imagine, we can just suppose that, yeah, there's some population of people and they have this slightly different concept of knowledge. Okay, so why, what? Well, now, what's so special about the way that we happen to think about knowledge? I mean, that's just not entirely clear to me, and I suppose that part of why I I have a sort of some sympathy with the justified true belief account is, you know, it just seems like it seems like a very simple, straightforward definition, which kind of encapsulates what's important with respect to doing philosophy, say. Like, what a lot of philosophers are interested in is, they want to, like, get at the truth, and they also want to be able to, give reasons, right? The philosophers like playing this game of giving and criticizing reasons. Somebody asserts a proposition, I challenge them, then they present reasons for the proposition. That's kind of what this whole game is about. We don't have to care about playing that game, but philosophers like playing that game. In the case of, now when it comes to Gettier cases, I just think, well, look, the person in the Gettier case, okay, we're granting that their belief is true, and they have reasons, they have things that they can cite, they have a nice little story they can tell themselves about why they're justified. Of course, if they were given more information, maybe they would tell a slightly different story, but, like, this, but, I mean, it just seems like, yeah, in philosophy, right, philosophers want to have true beliefs, and they want to play this game of giving and criticizing reasons. They want to have justification. So that's why I tend to think, like, okay, there's something plausible about the idea of knowledge as justified true belief. But if we're presenting that as an analysis of the concept knowledge, I think there's something quite odd about, or it's just unclear, what the ultimate goal is, right? Like, are we just trying to give some sort of definition that, like, matches the way that English speakers use the term? I mean, is this just supposed to be some sort of sophisticated dictionary? Is epistemological theorizing just trying to produce a sophisticated dictionary? That seems a bit strange. like, so anyway, those were just some thoughts on knowledge in Gettier cases, and I'm going to end the video there. Thanks for watching.